All right, we are back for our third episode of DenSecure Cast. To myself, Mr. Alex Mortarosian. This one, we kind of wanted to talk about some things we see on a regular basis regarding managed service providers, managed security providers, and kind of the breakdown with what we see with our clients in those relationships when we end up doing some like an endpoint breach assessment, or what the industry typically calls assumed breach testing, or more obviously when we do threat emulation testing. I think a good place to start would be for those who may watch this later, watching now, whatever, to define threat emulation testing. So Alex, you want to just give like brief rundown? I mean, what the intent of that type of testing is?
Yeah, you gave the first buzzword for assumed breach testing, so I'll give the next one.
Yeah.
Threat emulation testing is commonly defined as a purple team assessment. So it's a collaborative exercise in which we are assessing your technical controls in terms of how they're operating efficiently. And also we're testing potential incident response capabilities, whether it be your internal SOC or also managed service security providers, which we'll talk about. But the whole point of the exercise is to emulate threat active behavior. And some of that comes from cyber threat intelligence reporting. It comes from our expertise if we're investigating new techniques of how to actually execute that and understand the outputs. It's an iterative process. So when we're performing these types of tests, it could be happening externally, it could be happening internally. But the whole idea of it is we're designing this playbook that can branch off to different areas, but we're going to execute an offensive procedure, evaluate that output both from was it successful or did it fail for whatever reason on our side from our team's perspective, and then the defensive output, did it line up to assumptions? Because I commonly say that's where in the security space we are probably one of the only places where you pay for a service, and if you go to a mechanic and you ask for oil change, you need a filter replacement, whatever you want to do, they'll itemize it. You understand the type of service that you're going to get. Maybe the prices are going to be a little bit different, but ideally you're going to get exactly what you are paying for. And cybersecurity, it's not really like that. So that's probably what we're going to be discussing. So you don't really get to test those assumptions up until a threat actor does, or you hire a third party or have an internal team to kind of do it. So that's the real takeaway from a threat emulation assessment. And the key difference is really targeting control exercises or validating controls through a variety of exercises utilizing offensive security means.
Right. So given that, when we are performing this kind of work, do we typically how often does the client ask us, like, should we tell our MSSP that you're coming?
Yeah. It really depends on the contract. Most of the time it's beneficial to at least inform your SOC or your MSSP that you will be doing some sort of testing, not necessarily when, but there will be potentially some testing occurring, and they want them to act as if it's a true incident or utilize it as a true test. We don't want to perform alert fatigue. We're not trying to conflict processes between real activity that your teams or your third parties are dealing with from a day-to-day. So there's definitely a balancing act. I think it is best beneficial to treat it as a real exercise the best we can. But at least with those exercises, they're meant to be collaborative in nature. So we're not trying to throw surprises any means. We're not trying to play gotcha games either. We're really trying to enhance or maturize what controls you have, or at least put them to the test to validate your assumptions behind them, and also then enhance gaps potentially if there's detections or preventative opportunities that should be implemented.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not a gotcha, right? This is not a red team, right? This is not even a pen test. It's supposed to be completely collaborative, right? So with that collaboration, right, we would expect, when it typically goes, when you or another member of the team are performing these, and you're doing the playbooks, right? You're running the testing. How often would you say an MSP/MSSP is actually back and forth with you during that testing? Is it after, right? Like, when is this? Right? Like,
it's definitely after.
I know what the ideal is, but
like you said, the ideal is both parties come to it ready to be collaborative and support that assessment for success. Oftentimes it is after the testing is performed that we're kind of going through and sifting through logs and that data after the exercise has already been complete. The best scenarios, at least the most ideal circumstances, are where we kind of have a middleman and we're doing the testing kind of live directly with the client, or the MSSPs kind of acknowledging alerts and proceeding on with testing. That's an ideal world, but obviously it's definitely more of the latter of where it's afterwards of kind of assisting through logs and having a little bit back and forth where we're playing both the blue team and the red team aspects of it.
I mean, these days, before we get into the rest of this, I mean, these days, do you feel percentage-wise, how often is it an adversarial conversation with said MSSP or MSP?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can be, because I think looking at it from the lens as we're coming in, and if their only first news of this is that, hey, you're not doing a good job from the client, or you didn't detect anything, what's going on, that could be adversarial. But I think at the end of the day, the way I look at it,
the messaging to the MSP is typically coming from the client.
Yeah.
Right. But oftentimes they are CC'd. I mean, they're CC'd on communications, right, that we're having. So it's not like we're like, hey,
yeah,
you missed all this. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
the client's upset, but
yeah. And at the end of the day, we're not doing this for like you said, a gotcha. It's more of how do we make the client better? And the client's expecting some service, or they have a contract with partnerships that they're expecting some sort of service to be delivered on their behalf. And that's what we're there to either validate or enhance in the background. So ultimately, I think a lot of it is that, I don't know what your opinion of this is, so I'm curious, but the marketing of these tools and services, everyone always says that there's no silver bullet in cybersecurity, but I feel like there's an overemphasis right now on EDRs and how those solutions work as if they are. So every client just somewhat relies on those defaults and this one service to kind of solve all their cybersecurity needs. And it's kind of a paradox where everyone says, oh, there's no silver bullet, but then everyone acts like there is, at least from my experience with these types of exercises.
It's the silver Sentinel one bullet.
Yeah. Or CrowdStrike, whatever. Yeah.
I'm not crapping on any individual one. It just
came
to mind. So I don't know, like, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the defaults, but like issues, I feel like the issues that we see, and to be frank, I don't do this testing. You and our senior pen tester, Matthew Burns, do that. And I feel like the two of you guys, like what we're typically talking about in chat is there's, some really basic stuff is still missed on a regular basis, right? So like Matt was talking the other day about a client where if he Kerber roasted once, there was no detection. If he Kerber roasted a bunch of times, then all of a sudden there was a detection or an alert or something, right? Like that, or like Bloodhound, right? Running Bloodhound as part of a threat and like that not getting picked up on somehow, right? So like, I feel like that low-hanging fruit is still consistently missed. And, the client gets aggravated because we tell them it's like, that's low-hanging fruit that should have been caught. And they're like, well, why wasn't it? Right. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess you need to ask the people you're paying a bunch of money to who are supposed to be doing this for you. Right. And then we get sucked into that conversation. And then on these calls, we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Right. And I get that it's a threat emulation. But it kind of puts us in this precarious position where it's like, well, we're the consultant. We don't want to say bad things about anybody, but yeah, I mean, in our opinion, this is pretty low hanging fruit. Right. And oftentimes it comes down to, and I guess like, at least in my opinion, if you're trying to get to root cause of why this stuff happens, it's like, okay, well, maybe the service provider doesn't have all the telemetry that they need in order to get the job done properly. And then my response to that would be like, well, why? Right? Did you ask for it? Right? Or did you just kind of like deploy an endpoint detection and response system and then say, all right, we're good to go. We'll call you. Right? Like leaving the default configs in place, I'm not tuning anything. I'm not baselining, right? Like none of that. Just being like, okay, you're paying for this kind of like cut and paste service that we give every single other client. We have the same exact thing until somebody complains. Here it is, right? Now, I'm not saying that's everybody, right? But like it feels like when we've had these conversations and we see what happens and does not happen, it's a very strong case that that's what's going on. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think part of it is just going back is that the over-reliance of those default tools is part of the problem, where if you have a managed service provider and they aren't doing any sort of detection engineering, they're not offering you new custom alerts or meeting with you, or you're not meeting with them for whatever reason, whether it be monthly or quarterly basis to figure out, hey, what's new? Are we ingesting these new sources of information to detect those bloodhound techniques or the kind of low-hanging fruit? Because part of it is that when we are performing these tests, when you say we've ran bloodhound, for instance, there's 100 different ways that we can collect information that emulates the behavior of what bloodhound collection looks like. Right. That could be ran from a PowerShell script, which is very easy to detect and block, and most likely is going to get caught by the CrowdStrike Sentinel-1s. But then if you run it from a SOX proxy, if you're doing it from a different position that is emulating that behavior, right, that gets a little bit more tricky to then how do you actually alert on the behavior is really the end goal of what we're trying to accomplish with those types of tests. And that requires tuning. And that's the biggest gap where either the client is under the impression that their MDR service or their managed service provider is doing the tuning. And then the managed service provider will flip it back and say, oh, no, you're the one supposed to be doing the custom alerts.
Oh, yeah, that conversation.
So it's kind of a gray area that I think part of it are these assumptions of what the service that they're receiving should be delivering on up until we actually test those assumptions, unfortunately.
Well, that's the annoying thing is like, oh, we have MDR.
Yeah.
No. Okay, well, who's doing the M part of that?
Yeah, the managed detection.
Like, if they're sold you a service called managed detection and response, they should be managing the detection and response, which goes back to another annoyance is where they put it on the client too often to be like to be doing all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that also comes down to like, client, did you read what you bought? Right? Like, do you understand the contract, or did somebody just say, hey, we need this, go find a provider within our budget and sign on the dotted line and we're good, right? Like, I mean, part of it does have to be, right, like on the client to understand what you're getting yourself into. But if you do your diligence as a client and then you understand it, you signed, and then you're not getting what you paid for, right? I mean, I guess is where we come in, but that's when you find out you're not getting what you're paying for, or you think you're paying for. And then that conversation has to happen, right? I mean, we've literally had clients tell their service providers, we want money back because you guys failed, right? Because even the most basic thing was missed. You didn't update our you put it on us to update our Sentinel-1 agents, right? And it turns out, in fact, that you had some weird, what was the one recently where they had Sentinel-1?
Mm-hmm.
This is a Matt Burns job. And it turned out for 2 years, the agent hadn't been updated. And then the MSSP was like, well, that's on the client to update the agents.
Yeah.
And then they're like, even if we wanted to, you have some administrative control within the admin dashboard where we can't do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and then they're like, oh, our bad. The MSSP was. And that was an MDR.
Yeah.
Right. So like, it blows my mind that this is happening in 2026, where there is not an understanding back and forth of what the relationship should be. And don't even get me started on the fact that now, we've talked about MSSPs and MSPs and MSSPs. MSPs dipping their toes into the pool of security is so ridiculous, right? Because now they're conflating the two, right? They're like, we're going to both manage the environment, keep the blinky lights blinking, and we're going to quote unquote secure it for you, right? We're all in one package. And have you seen a single instance of that where they were doing both well?
Definitely not well in my experience. I think those circumstances, what happens is that you have an EDR that gets implemented by the MSP. And then essentially what happens is they're replaying off the same email alerts that you'd get from the tool itself back to you and asking you, hey, is this legitimate information? And that's the frustrating part to me of whenever a client gets
By the way, real quick, this is also why people are worried about SOC level 1 analysts going the way of the dinosaur.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like when we do these tests and then I see an alert that comes back from a third party like a MSSP, or like they're providing this SOC level as a service, and they're essentially just translating back an alert that got triggered by a tool, and then they're asking the client, is this expected behavior, without at least triaging or understanding like why is this happening, like who is doing this activity, where could this be coming from. They're almost putting the work back on the client, which I always think is a bit ridiculous. I understand
Yeah.
there's some things that, is this expected behavior? That's a good question to ask in certain types of alerts.
At a
But if it's
minimum, it
something,
shows you're paying attention. Like
right,
this.
and then picking this piece of information and tying it back to, hey, this is happening at the same time as X, Y, and Z, we're going to now really investigate this and treat this as a true incident or a case, instead of just isolated alerts and be like, hey, is this expected behavior? Someone doing X, Y, and Z?
I mean, I guess, just a pause. I mean, we're getting into the idea of like, now we're getting off the reservation of like threat emulation testing, because in an endpoint or an assumed breach or like a red team or something, like, okay, sure. But like, they know we're there during a threat emulation, right? So it's like, for them to be like, is this expected activity? It's like, well, it's us, right? But like, so you caught it, that's good. Now what can you do with it, right? Like when we do this and follow on and, lateral movement and potential data extraction or whatever the playbook is based on the real world scenario, right? How can you chain that together? I mean, do we have in the time that we've been doing this had and I bet we have, but
like a positive experience of like very impressed. Is where you going?
Well, not just that, but like they literally saw soup to nuts every single thing and can put that story together, even though we told them the story. Like, could they validate the fact that they saw the whole story?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been mature clients that we've tested that have very strong controls, and
Right.
it's evident that they have detection engineering. That's kind of what I was referencing in the back of they're meeting monthly or weekly when they receive an alert. This happened like recently, even like when I was talking through with a client that, hey, we did something as simple as adding a local account on the endpoint. And they're describing, hey, this is something we thought was a detection. Like, we know it was caught in the past. For some reason, it's not working. I tested it myself. They ran the test the same way of, let me just add a local account on my machine and see what happens. They see the event log information, and then they went back to the provider and said, hey, we want to alert for this. We know other clients are getting it. How do we tune it? What's going on? Why are we missing this? So
I mean, that right there is like, how is that not a thing already?
Yeah, I mean, well,
like, how is that? I mean, we bitch we complain about default controls, like, oh, everything's the default. That should be in the default.
That's
right?
someone created a local account, like a backdoor account, essentially.
Local admin account created. Like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the defaults is hard because I understand that the MSSPs and MDRs are catering to a specific environment, and they're probably tuning their service to minimize the impact and workload.
The lowest common denominator.
Almost like the minimum viable product of making sure it's going to fit their needs of each client as they see fit. And for the unsophisticated actor or the script kiddies and the ransomware actors that don't really care about how they're operating and the tradecraft they're using, they do a really good job. I mean, these tools are really powerful telemetry sources. They're gathering all this information. It's not like they can't see it. It's there. Like, you could pull up the exact event ID. Hey, we saw this activities, and it's in the dashboard. But why is it not making an alert? Like, why is it not allowing you to then triage and use that information? And that's the missing piece of, well, they're not tuned. They're not creating these detections. Is it per environment? Is there a use case that it made sense to turn off? Those are the bigger questions that are sometimes missed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to remember where I was going with this. There was the whole point of asking this question. Oh, we were getting like MSPs turning into going down the whole
into security.
MSSP type of behavior.
Sure.
I mean, I get it. Like, they want to make money. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, what other services can we sell this client? Okay, well, we already sell them. Like, I mean, we have there's MSPs that are selling, like, okay, they have SentinelOne, or we have CrowdStrike, or we sold them whatever the case may be and installed it, right? Then I feel like right there, just by the virtue of, like, it is not their specialty to then tune, configure, monitor whatever is going on. right? Like they're just kind of like making money off of a sale, like, marking up whatever the product costs, selling it to the client.
Yeah, they're
They know how to
resellers. They're
points.
just
They're
reselling.
yeah, they're just reselling
Yeah,
a very sophisticated product that is not perfect out of the box, needs to be tuned, whatever. I'm willing to bet that most clients have absolutely no idea that that's the case, right? They just think, okay, well, we got our, quote unquote, most advanced CDR out there.
Yeah.
We're safe, right? We don't need anything else. Just plug and play, right? And like, then you ask, okay, well, if you're going to get in the middle of that conversation, well, MSP is going to be like, well, I mean, we just resold them that. We never said anything about monitoring it, configuring it, whatever, right? That's not our job. And then the client's like, well, we missed all the stuff, like, and you sold it to us, so it's your fault, right? And then there's like that back and forth. When it comes to somebody explicitly claiming to be an MSSP, that is like completely unacceptable, because in that contract, I would be very surprised if there is not, if you are literally a security service provider, I doubt the only service that you should be responsible for is clicking install on the agent across the environment, right? There's got to be more to that.
Yeah.
And yet it still seems to be the case that that's not what's happening.
Yeah. And part of the unfortunate reality is that, that's, I think, the default of, it's very easy to overly rely on these tools, and you promise that it's going to prevent ransomware, it's going to do all these amazing things. But then it's very easy, if you know that the defaults are there, to kind of work around them or get past and say, hey, now we're in this environment, we're going to do the testing. And that's the biggest difference between endpoint detection response, where you're the one managing it and you're the one responsible essentially to tune it, versus managed detection response, where ideally the managed provider knows what they're doing and is actually collaborating with you to kind of meet the gaps that tool is going to have. Every tool is going to be tuned a little bit differently. Someone's going to be catching things a little bit differently than CrowdStrike. And they're very powerful tools, but if you don't tune them to your use case and you don't have a partnership with someone that actually knows what they're doing and is providing you with information and gaps of, hey, knowing that your environment's like this, we should set it up in a different way, or these policies are going to work in a separate setting. We need to update that tool on this basis. As simple as that. Like when you're talking about that they didn't even update the agent policy, essentially. And outside of just EDR, like, are they monitoring other things? Are they supporting collection of other data? We're getting into other buzzwords of like XDR and like all this next gen SIM solutions and things that all these buzzwords are coming out, which I think is muddying the water. So I put some of the blame on the marketing for the vendors, honestly. I get that the client should do their due diligence, but at the same time, if you're being told and promised that all these things can happen, and you put reality, like the rubber hits the road, let's actually put it to a test. I think it's going to be a world of pain to figure out hey, this is not exactly what we expected it to look like.
Right. I mean, so for example, right, I mean, something I see in reports go out constantly when we do threat emulation is an info on portable Python and BG info being used to do something, right? Why do you think it is that those always get by?
Part of it is, I think those default tools and sensors, they will probably pick those up at some point. If enough clients probably complain that either our technique or something. Part of it is, our trade.
We're helping that happen. One, threat emulation.
to some extent, yeah. And I've seen it happen where, I've seen the Overwatch team and others like call us out by name of saying, hey, and that was a good client experience of like, hey, we tracked down their C2 and we know it's actually Wolf doing the.
So we're now an APT to.
Like we know it's them doing, and that's part of it. Of tradecraft is kind of like, I think we talked about this before when it was like this competitive advantage, thinking of like this tradecraft and understanding these techniques kind of work. On sideloads and BG info thing that you're talking about have given us success operationally for offensive testing to execute things and do bad things in the background. But I think they'll catch up. I think the reason is that they're missing is because if you're just relying on the defaults, they're catering towards the entire service and looking at intelligence that they're getting from attackers. And some attackers are not as sophisticated as you can imagine. I mean, you look at ransomware reports, they're putting Mimikatz.exe on a domain controller. Yeah. They're not doing the next level of sophistication, at least trying to. even evade or do basic evasion stuff. So I think that's part of it. Of tradecraft is privatized. It's getting different per competitor and third party that you work with, and that's why we probably have success. But I imagine to catch up on those defaults too.
I mean, so we had that conversation the other day, like on the BG info thing for a client's environment where that worked.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I was on the report review call, and I don't even know what they're calling themselves as a specific client, because they do both. It was either MSP or MSSPs type service. And, the client took the conversation down the hole of, okay, well, we understand that it's a Microsoft native, whatever, right? So like, we understand that, but like, still it was used for offensive purposes. Why wasn't it picked up on, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then the answer was, well, if it wasn't straight up, well, if we have to do that, we have to do it for everybody. It wasn't that bad, but it was like, there's a lot of, basically they said like, well, there's a lot of native Windows services and executables that binaries, whatever, that can be used for malicious things. And my immediate thought is, how do you not, go to like lolbass.com or go like whatever that website, right? Like there are very clear ways in which these things are used in the wild that are known about, right? So like, I could be wrong, but like we weren't doing something completely earth-shattering with BG info, were we?
I don't know if I would define it earth-shattering. I mean, just to kind of give some background to anyone listening. So BG info is a sysinternals tool that's developed by Microsoft. So it's a signed Windows utility. It's trusted, and we're using it to proxy execution. BG info is traditionally used, and its valid purpose is for changing a background on your Windows desktop. There's a way to execute code. So what we could do is we could develop a malicious payload and have BG info proxy the execution and execute our malicious payload to establish command and control. So now we could operate and use our channel to communicate with that process and do the nasty things that we do and iterate through our playbook essentially.
But would you say that, and given that I don't have this knowledge natively like you probably do, is that that exact use case for BG info used on a regular basis by threat actors?
Some are. I mean, if you look at cyber threat intelligence reporting, it's a known technique. I mean,
so there you go, right there. So there's plenty of that.
There's known
with all of the living off land binaries and scripts. So why is an MSSP not factoring that in for? And maybe I'm just, because again, I don't live in this world on a regular basis. Maybe I'm just ignorant. Why is that not part of the baseline for every environment? All of those known TTPs using native binary scripts, executables, whatever. I'm not saying you have an answer for this. I mean, that's kind of a rhetorical question, I guess, but it just kind of blows me away.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge, where the honest truth is that these providers have many clients, and then they're going to say the thing that you don't want to hear. Almost, hey, if we did this, we're going to get a lot of alerts and negative feedback, because there are valid use cases. Some clients do use BG info. I've seen it on my assessments when I'm going through network shares. There's BG info right there. It's
to execute code and then proxy this.
Not like that, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That part,
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But some of those detections are obviously hard. It's not an easy, trivial thing.
It's not an excuse for MSSPs, though, in my opinion. Like, if you're going to sell this extremely expensive service to clients, you got to be good at it, right? Like, I know that people like to say, well, we got to have like some C players on your team too, or some B players. Like in this case, I don't think that's acceptable, right? Because when they miss something or screw up, like really bad things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most frustrating part is not just the BG info part, but it's the lack of the EDRs by default. Just don't really pick up C2 traffic all that well. Some do, and have gotten a lot better recently. Not all, but for a lot of times when we do that BG info thing, or we use a trusted utility or a third-party app that's signed, like the Pythons or Notepads, to do the bad things for us, they're still not picking up like that process is beaconing out every second to a website that is not known to the organization. And that's kind of a telltale sign where we're trying to increase the noise of like, hey,
That's what I love it.
it's
Sleep
beaconing
zero.
out. Yeah, sleep zero,
Sleep zero.
intervals. It's just checking in, interactive session. It's not even trying to hide that activity. We're running bloodhound collections on it. We're doing all sorts of nasty things. That's the part where if you miss that first part of it, I think the unacceptable part is, well, why can't we then pick up the malicious things afterwards? Because that's the first step. I don't think you can expect that to get blocked anytime. Like there's always going to be workarounds to play that cat and mouse game where you're going to get some sort of execution, but it's afterwards of this process is now calling out to the internet every second. It's running queries against your Active Directory domain. Why? Like what is happening? And those detections are, I think, unacceptable not to have in place at least.
I mean, it's not like we don't have, unfortunately, I think it's probably the minority. I mean, we have, clients we work with who use very, or at least in our neck of the woods, known providers that do this that are, I mean, at a minimum, you would want them to not be adversarial about it, right? And so we have ones that are like, yo, you're right, we missed this. Like, we'll come up with like a detection I mean, oftentimes I feel like it's pretty brittle detections, right, that they come up with where, this exact thing, this exact command, exact syntax, if it happens again, like it'll get flagged.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not it's the command, it's not the technique, right? At a minimum, they're willing to like work on it, right? But I feel like the really big ones that are like national or even international, I couldn't care less, right? Like you said, it's like they want broad subscription base, broad client base, right? Do the minimum. I don't know this for a fact, but I would guess if you want them to do more than the minimum, it's going to be exponentially expensive to actually do any type of custom, quote unquote, custom engineering for you. I mean, we don't want to name names, right? But like, I mean, there's MDR providers out there that do a good job, and there's those that are hucksters, I guess you could say. But I feel like, unfortunately, like the hucksters are the
predominantly who you run into.
Predominance in the industry, right? So I mean, we can't talk about this forever, right? But like, in your opinion, what should, like, if you're small, medium-sized business, right? You've got a modest or moderate budget. I mean, not that we know what these people are. That's a question. Have you ever seen have you ever like, and I think I did this once, and I don't even know if I got the full contract or the full SNW. Have you ever asked for, let's drill into this to get to root cause? Like, let me see your contract. I want to know what you paid for and what it says.
I haven't seen it. It's a good idea though. Maybe start going.
Years ago I asked, and I don't know if I ever got it. But yeah, I mean, you could go down a paper trail to figure out, okay, well, they say this is the client's fault. And the client says, well, it's the service provider's fault. And it's like, all right, well, let's bust open the paperwork and see what you signed for and what they sold you, right? I would be shocked if even some of those statements of work or service contracts or SL, whatever you want to call them, are like even that verbose. Like to be like, we will, on every month, whatever, like make sure we have custom detections based on this client and their specific threat case, right? Like their threat model, make sure everything's up to date, right? Like we're going to have quarterly check-in calls. Yeah. We're going to do this. We're going to do that, right? Like I could be wrong. Again, I'm not sitting here claiming that I've ever worked on the sales side for one of these vendors or had to procure these services, right? So everything we're saying, take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, yeah, I'd be surprised if it was even well spelled out in that documentation to get signed.
I mean, outside of the doom and gloom of like what we're talking about, I think the best experience that I've had, even when there are gaps, because the way I look at it is there's always going to be a gap in some sort of detection. So it's a continuous process.
Nothing's perfect.
So if a client's expecting that they're going to catch everything, we're already looking at it from a bad perspective. And I'm going to tell you right now that we're going to have some
we tell clients that, and we so that they're not just like,
expecting that
perfection every time.
Exactly. Yeah.
From their service providers.
If they caught everything, then almost what's the point of that exercise? I mean, unless you're
Right.
validating the controls, but we want to work hard to ensure that we're giving you a more sophisticated level of enhancements of saying, have you thought about it like this? I mean, sure, you could detect Bloodhound if I ran it from the default GitHub Python collector, but what if I ran it like this, like in a different way? That's kind of what we want to get to. And there's going to be gaps, but then the best experience I've ever had is the client or the MSP owns to that level of, hey, this makes sense. Let's make a rule right now, retest it. Like we're going to go in and we're going to tune it. The most frustrating ones are when they say, hey, we don't do custom alerts. You have to, handle it yourself. So it's kind of like that partnership of like, if you're looking for the right provider, especially if you're a small or mid-sized business to some extent, those are the types of conversation I would expect to happen earlier, and saying, is this someone that we kind of trust, and we're paying a lot of money to give you the service and kind of needs and that partnership that you're looking for of actually extending and maturizing your environment, rather than the default, like, hey, we set up CrowdStrike, you're good to go. Or we set up 701, you don't need to do anything else. It'll block ransomware, everything like that. And if that's all you're hearing, maybe it's time for either check and call or look for something else.
Have you ever seen Elastic in the wild?
I have not at a client, but they're very good. From what I know, they're one of the top EDRs that
Which is interesting that you don't.
I would test a lot of my
That's the marketing right there
against them, just based on how powerful they are. They do a really good job.
Wait, what did you say? You would test payloads against that?
They have, because they open source a lot of their detections. They're one of the only providers, which I think is a testament to like how they approach it. They open source a lot of their detections, so you can see how they're writing detections and if a rule is overly brittle or if it's actually detecting the techniques and behaviors. Those are the types of sources that I'm interested in, because their EDRs, all EDRs are really powerful, at least the top ones. They maybe operate and detect a little bit differently on some of the techniques, but ultimately the way I look at EDRs is their number one source of power is telemetry gathering. You have all the data. It's kind of like this big data problem of like, what can you actually do with it now? Some are going to have default alerts to do and detect X, Y, and Z. Some are going to do different things. Like if you're looking at like remote access software, I had a client that could detect AnyDesk, but then I tried to install TeamViewer and that worked instead. They don't have detection for that. So we want to get to the coverage of, okay, you can detect some aspects of it, but why not all these different types? And are you just detecting a tool? Or are you detecting behavior? So that's kind of the challenge and understanding of, these are really powerful tools, but they're not just flip it and forget it kind of thing. And someone needs to it's a day job. Like you're expecting someone to kind of manage it and oversee it, enhance it over time.
Yep. Makes sense. So yeah, I mean, we don't partner with anybody, but if you are interested in hearing our thoughts on actual names on who to go with / potentially stay away from, hit us up. Outside of this conversation, you know where to find us. I think conversations and advice are always free. So with that, anything you wanted to add, or do we want to cut this off here?
I don't.
I guess to close, like, you kind of started down this road, but what are if a client or anyone is out there and they're like shopping?
Yeah, like evaluations. Like how do they get?
Like, how do you even evaluate?
Yeah. So there used to be this really powerful annual exercise called MITRE ATT&CK evaluation, which unfortunately many of these top vendors have stopped participating in, whether it be because of the old marketing and kind of ROI they've been receiving, I guess, as part of it. But those were probably the most transparent levels of exercise, not just because of how they're operating and not because each vendor claimed that they're 100% MITRE ATT&CK aligned and how amazing they all are, but they provided transparent reporting of what the tool actually looked like. And they had an MDR service evaluation where you had the Rapid7s, CrowdStrikes, Red Canary, all these different top providers where they're essentially evaluated, and you could take a look at exactly what the alert would look like. Does this console make sense to me? And you can kind of click on these screenshots on the MITRE ATT&CK evals page.
So like end user experience, essentially.
Exactly. And you can see exactly what the triaging looks like, what the alert looks like, not of like how they're operating and saying 100% MITRE ATT&CK aligned,
right,
but to kind of get a sense of like, hey, does this make sense for us? Of if I got an email like this from this MDR service, like, do I like it? Do I like the information that I'm gathering? And those are kind of the most transparent. We don't really have a really good way to transparently vet that, unfortunately, especially with the limited participation I've seen with the recent evals. I'm hoping that kind of changes in the future, whether it be a new platform like a service or something.
Who does still participate?
There's a couple of people that still do, but a lot of the bigger names dropped out, I think, for this year, unfortunately.
Anyone notable still participate? I mean, would you say that the people who are still participating are like directly correlate to the quality of product? I don't know if you've actually like seen it.
I think it flipped though, because the bigger providers that I would imagine that should still be participating have dropped out, because I think they just aren't getting the same marketing stuff or whatever reason. And maybe it's a lot of lift on their end to keep doing this.
Right.
The new ones probably out there probably want a name for themselves with saying and getting to that position, I'm assuming. So I don't know. Maybe it could be interesting.
Maybe. Cool. All right. We'll cut it off there. Thanks for joining us. Who's this? Episode 3? It's our third episode. Yeah, third episode. We're gonna have to come up with ideas for our next one. We'll probably we gotta start having guests on too.
Yeah, that's true.
If you got any ideas for what you want to hear us talk about, please email, comment, whatever you got to do on LinkedIn, YouTube. This is broadcast to both. You can leave comments as you like, or you can email us. DenSecure Services QR code is there. It's pretty easy to get a hold of us. So let us know. Otherwise, we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another super cool episode with Alex, myself, and maybe even a new guest this time. So thanks for the time, everybody. See ya.